All right, I think we're live. Hi, Anthony. Hello, everyone,
Hi,
and welcome to another live stream on
thank
Canvas
you, thank you,
Technology
thank you.
Triangle.
Glad to be there.
Anthony, you got to mute. Okay, let's try that again. I heard an echo. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to another live. Can you guys hear me? Private chat. Sorry, having some technical difficulties where it's just regurgitating through the microphone.
You muted me?
I don't get it.
What's going on?
Yeah, hi, Anthony. Yeah, I muted you because for some reason when I start talking, I can hear Google Play notes, which is strange. Um, okay, I think I found out why. Hello, test 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm not hearing it anymore. Okay, sorry about that. Technical. Oh, hopefully that was the only demo fail. All right, starting again. I'll unmute you now, Anthony. Okay, welcome to another event, Canvas Technology Triangle. Still new at this, so for some reason things didn't work from last month. But tonight we have Anthony Giretti back to talk to us about building minimal APIs with ASP.NET Core 8. So this is part 2. Last month we did part 1. And following Anthony's talk, I'll be doing a presentation on migrating .NET applications over to Azure and some new tooling that came out at Ignite last year. Okay, Anthony, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Giretti. I'm Senior Software Developer Architect at Marchex. I'm working with Kelon in the same company. I'm a Microsoft MVP certified, Azure and .NET, and I'm the author of 2 books, Coding Clean, Reliable, and Safe REST API with the ASP.NET Core 8, and Beginning gRPC with ASP.NET Core 6. So today, I will introduce again minimal APIs. This is a part 2, and we will talk about 3 major advanced features in minimal APIs. So what's the plan? I will do a recap of quickly of the session 1, what are minimal APIs. I will introduce you minimal APIs advanced feature, and I will answer questions if you have any. So what are minimal APIs? They were known as root to code in ASP.NET Core 3.5 and they evolved to minimal APIs. So only the name has changed, but it's a way to implement endpoints with ASP.NET Core dependency without any else dependency. I mean, we use only ASP.NET Core and not MVC stuff. So like I said, it's lighter and more performant. It relies only on ASP.NET Core only. It's simpler to implement, simpler to unit test, support Open API natively, Swagger, etc. Support dependency injection. So this is typically the default template. You have your program.cs, which doesn't need any more startup.cs, so you can do in a single file, everything in a single file. And the default endpoint is weather, which returns a collection of weather status. This is pretty simple, and everything turned around with some extension method like mapget, mappost. You have a word for each verb, and yeah, that's pretty easy to use. Sorry, and that's it. So by default, as I said, is compatible with a Swagger, so it's installed by default. You just have to run it /swagger /index.html, and you can find your endpoint there. So you can keep it all along your development phase, and newly endpoint coded will be added in the Swagger. So what we will talk about today is 3 major points. I will talk about encapsulating minimal API implementation and root groups, which helps to organize your code, so you don't need to write all your endpoint in the program.cs file. It's for 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 endpoints, it's okay. But if you have more than a bunch of endpoints, I would say, you need to organize your code and split them into different classes. I will show you how. Minimal APIs also support implementation of custom parameter binding, like web APIs, and I will also show you the usage of action filters. Let's get started. So when you want to create a group of endpoints which are related to the same topic, I would say topic, it's always good to organize them and put them into the same class. So it's a static class, because if you remember, minimal APIs are a group of static methods which execute lambda functions. So you just have to implement a static function which return I result, which is mandatory, and take in parameters the parameters you want. So since minimal APIs and minimal endpoints support dependency injection, and you want to pass them into your function, you have to, or you can, if you want, add them in your static function description. So you have them as parameters, like it was an endpoint. And you can create, for example, post country, which takes a payload from the body country. You can pass a validator class, a mapper class, another service, and you do your stuff. And you can add, for the same purpose, SOC, separation of concern principle. If you follow it, you will add any endpoints, any function related to country. So I created another function, get country, which returns a list of countries. So how do you use that? Like this. So you can create a group of endpoints. You just have to use a map group from the web application. It's not mandatory. You can simply register them directly, but I want to show you root groups as well. So you have a function that you bind to your endpoint group map post. You map the post country static function to it and get country to it. And plus that, you can create a root group which share the same base root. So it's much simpler. You can implement it into a static class as well. You need to take the web application instance, and then you can register it in your programs.cs with a single line. So we have 2 steps. You create a bunch of classes, which is not related to ASP.NET Core at all. I mean, it's about executing your code, okay? But you have to return I results. So you have some dependency of ASP.NET Core. And then you can regroup them to not declare them one by one in the program.cs, and you can declare it in the program.cs with a single line. This is pretty useful and very convenient and easy to read. And the good news is it doesn't change anything on the Swagger compatibility. Swagger will see dash country path and dash slash countries get as well. So you will find everything in Swagger. No worries with that. So it's a great feature to keep your minimal API organized. I would like to make you a recall first on the custom parameter binding. As I said, it's available on minimal APIs like it was on web APIs. So if you really need to implement custom parameter binding, you can with minimal APIs, and you don't have to worry about migrating from a web API to minimal APIs. So yes, as I said, parameter binding is a feature of ASP.NET Core that takes the parameter of an HTTP request and converts them into a type parameter passed to the function. It supports routes parameter, query string, body as JSON only data, body as form data, key value pair, headers, and other implicit dependency injection, as I showed you, and well-not type as HTTP request. You can pass the HTTP request class by dependency, and you don't need to declare it somewhere. You don't need to register the instance. It's automatically known by ASP.NET Core. What do we want to do there? So let's take, for example, a list of IDs. Unfortunately, they come from the headers, and they're separated by a dash. How can you do that? Because you're expecting a collection of country IDs from the header. Okay, so it's pretty much simpler and even more simpler than web APIs. What needs an attribute, you don't need to create a custom attributes on minimal APIs. Nothing changed on your endpoint. You just have to add from header attributes and get your country's IDs class here. And you can get them one by one. How I did do that? Super easy. In the country IDs class, you declare your list of IDs, which are a list of integers, and you have to implement the static try parse method, which returns a bool, which takes in input value, which is the parameter 1-2-3 we saw in the screen capture. You have to implement the EI format provider if you need it, and it returns as out parameter country IDs, so the class itself. So you just split the string with the separator, and you create the collection of IDs. And that's it. That's pretty much simple. You don't need to create a custom attributes on your action method in web APIs. So minimal APIs supported very well, and I find it personally more convenient. I would like to talk about action filter. I've been asked many times if minimal APIs support action filter, and the answer is yes. For example, you can do many things. So you can perform logging, so performance logging. So you have to implement a filter. You can name it whatever you want, as long as you inherit from I endpoint filter. Everything works like a regular class, so you can use dependency injection like any class in ASP.NET Core, and you must implement the invoke async method, which returns a value task of object. You get the context, the current context, and you have an endpoint filter delegate, which is similar to the middleware next delegate. So it acts like the regular middleware in ASP.NET Core, but it's only executed on the minimal endpoint you want to test and apply the log performance filter, for example. So you can add your logging, you can catch the start time and the elapsed time. So everything that happened before next will get executed before the minimal endpoint execution, and everything after next will be executed after the minimal endpoint execution. So if there is any exception in your minimal endpoints and you don't catch the error, you don't handle it, you won't be able to complete the execution of the filter, because everything that comes after next won't be executed. How you apply it to your minimal endpoint, you just have to add endpoint filter extension method, and you pass as a generic type the type of your endpoint filter, and that's it. That's, again, very, very, very straightforward. I have another example. It's more advanced, but if you remember, in the session 1, I show you how to validate endpoints with your endpoints input with Fluent validation, since data annotation is not working at all. It's not handled by minimal API. So I will show you again how to validate inputs on minimal APIs. So validating. So first off, why we need to validate our inputs is because we need to ensure the data path in your API complies with your business rule and avoid getting malicious data. This is obvious. And it's not supported natively with data annotation, so we have a solution. It's Fluent validation. How does it work? It's a recall again if you missed session 1. So you must download the Fluent validation package. You can find it in NuGet.org, and you create a class, a validator class. For example, we want to make the name property not empty, and you will have a custom error message when name is not provided. And we want also to make filtering on content, on some content. We don't want to see any HTML tags, so we can also implement a regex. Okay, so now how do we use that? As I showed you last time, you need to scan your application to find all validator, and you can inject the validator with the payload as a generic parameter, I mean country, to validate it. So you inject iValidator and you perform your validation. So this is the most basic way to use validation on minimal API, but we can do better with action filters. How? We can create a generic input validator. So as you can see, you can do anything. You just need to create, let's go back, a validator. As you can see, abstract validator country. So we make a validation on the country object. So I name the country validator, but in fact, to be recognized and use it by the framework, you have to implement and inject in your function iValidator country, not country validator. Okay, so let's make it generic. iValidator is a property of the class, iValidator of T, and you can implement the filter like I show you. So you must implement invoke async, which return a value task of object, which take in parameter of the context, the HTTP context, the endpoint filter context, and the endpoint filter delegate. And like I did, I'm coming back to the previous code. Instead of copy pasting in any function, you can take the logic, the validation result, and managing validation with validation problem or not. You can keep it and write it once, and then return the next await invoke. So the validation, as you can see, is performed before the invocation of the endpoint. So your endpoint won't be executed if the validation doesn't pass, and will return all validation error through the result validation problem extension method, which is great. How do we do that? So with the action filter, you develop and you code your endpoint without any validation logic, and you had add endpoint filter, and you had your custom endpoint filter validation filter here. Remember, if you don't do that, you will have to copy paste the same kind of logic in every endpoint. So it's very much simpler. So please take advantage of action filter. It's really great, really, really great. It simplified my life. I would like now to introduce you another feature. Oops, I missed something. No, I did not miss anything. Action filter were the last feature I wanted to introduce you. So these are the three major feature among many, but the most important. So if you have any more question and see more content about Minimal API, please tell me, and I will be glad to create and design new example for you, more advanced example, real life example for you if you are interested in. That's it for me.
Thanks, Anthony. That's really good. That was a great follow-up to last month's talk on Minimal API. It's always something new to learn. And I really like that grouping of how you can put the backends. Really cleans up your program.cs file. So I didn't mention this before the chat, before we got started, but Anthony's been gracious enough again to offer to mail out a paperback copy of his book. So we will draw for a winner at the end. So just put a comment in the chat on YouTube.
I can show again where to find my book, maybe.
Yeah. So I just drop a question in. I'm going to get started in a couple minutes on my talk. So if you want to wait till after, that's fine. If you have a burning question for Anthony right now, please put it in the chat. Otherwise, I'll circle back and look at the comments after our next session. Okay, let me get ready. This over here. share screen, this guy. All right, Anthony, you're muted, which is good. Yeah, that's fine. So I'll go do my presentation now, and you can come back near the end if there's any questions. Okay. All right, let me turn off the ticker. Get ready. All right, welcome everyone. Tonight I'll be doing a quick little talk on migrating .NET applications over to Azure. I don't know if anyone's using Azure or what your status is, but Azure's one of the three major cloud platforms. You got Google GCP and Amazon AWS. So I'll be focusing this talk just on Azure and some specific tooling that can be used. All right, a little bit about me. My name is Callan Campbell. I'm one of the organizers of this of this user group. I work for a company called Adastra, a Microsoft MVP for the last 6 years. My career has spanned many Microsoft technologies, C#, desktop, mobile, and then most recently in the cloud with Azure, specifically on cloud native, migration, modernization, and integration and data analytics. I do have a blog over at theflyingmaverick.com, blog once in a while. I have Twitter, Flying Maverick, and I'm also a speaker at a bunch of community user groups in person. So usually the Global Azure Bootcamp in Toronto, on occasion the Azure Global Azure Bootcamp. Those are the main ones that I'll do. And then our user group is still virtual right now. I'm in the process of trying to get that back up and running in person out in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. So yeah, anyone wants to do a talk, present something, just reach out to me. More than happy to have you on virtually for the time being. If you know a place, have a venue, you think that we could host the user group at, reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. Okay. So quick agenda. So why migrate to Azure? I'll then be talking about the app migration journey. So what are some options available to us? I then have some demos near the end. And then I'll wrap up with some Q&A. Okay, so why migrate to Azure? So with Azure, Azure supports all kinds of different approaches and business priorities. So on the left, you retain control. And as we move to the right, sort of things become more simple and you relinquish that control over to Azure. This is known as the responsibility model pattern. I won't go into more detail on that, but there's a lot of information over on Microsoft Docs, Learn, that can go into more of those details. But essentially on the left, you think of like your VMs, your infrastructure as code. You're retaining, you're controlling and configuring the underlying OS, you're doing the networking. And then as we start moving over to the right where we have containers, that you're starting to get abstracted away. So you're no longer maintaining the operating system. And as we move into platform as a service, like functions, Azure App Service, now you're only just maintaining and worrying about the actual application. A lot of the other stuff has been moved over to Azure. You're still looking after it, but you're not maintaining actual VMs and OSs per se. And if you keep going all the way to the right, then we get into the low code, no code, so things like Power Platform, SaaS offering inside of Azure. So generally, and then we have our DevOps. I missed that one. And then DevOps can really shorten the development lifecycle and provide continuous integration delivery with high quality software through all of these processes. So tonight, my talk is just going to be really on platform as a service. So this is where many apps can migrate into Azure. So if you have a .NET web application, then it doesn't matter if it's containerized. If you have it as a container running inside of Docker right now, then that can move into platform as a service. There's a bunch of different options. If you're doing greenfield and starting something net new, then you have a lot more options too. You could just start building Azure Function apps. You can go down Azure Container Apps if you want to go more into the Kubernetes world, and if you want to go all in on Kubernetes, that's a whole other talk. But you have a lot more options. But if you already have an application that's right inside of IaaS on-prem and you want to start moving this into Azure, then Azure App Service is probably the best place for you to start. And many applications can move there. So the question is, how can you move in there? It's very different from running on IaaS on Windows. And if it is you're running latest .NET, you have the options of also running inside of Linux. So you don't have to go inside of IaaS on Windows. So Linux is another option. Okay, so why migrate to Azure? So lots of options. Cost is one. It's a lot more optimized, so you can save money on resources, maintenance. You don't need real estate. You don't need to pay a hosting provider. Whatever you want, you have the flexibility and only pay for what you're using and when you use it. So on the flip side of that, if you go overboard in Azure, things can cost a lot. So it is a double-edged sword, but that's probably true for most things, right? If you overbuild or make something too complicated, even on-prem, it can end up costing you a lot more. So flexibility. So when inside of Azure, any kind of application, in this case, we're talking about a web app specifically, but as demand spikes, you can automatically have it scale out to handle that demand. When things get back under control, calm down, you can have it automatically scale back in. So you don't need to jump online and start pushing buttons to scale out. You can have automated rules in place that will handle this for you. You can also run your workloads much closer to your end users. So if you have a global application, then you could run your application at the edge, multiple data centers or multiple Azure regions across the globe, and get your application much more closer, including leveraging like an Azure CDN so that you're not downloading all the web page assets from wherever your main site is. From a security perspective, Azure provides built-in security features and tools to help protect your applications and data. The security patching is automatically done by Azure in many cases. So again, this is the platform as a service, so you're not worrying about the underlying OS that you need to maintain. So they're doing that for you. If you were doing, let's say, if we're going to expand this out to databases and you're using Azure SQL versus SQL Server, and again, Azure SQL it's PaaS, so you're only worried about the actual database, your data, the actual patching of the SQL Server, the server itself, everything that would come with your database. That again is all handled behind the scenes by Azure, so you don't need to worry about that. Easily back up your applications with Azure. So for extra protection, you can store your backups in different geographical regions. From a compliance perspective, if your app has any compliance requirements, Azure offers a bunch of solutions for various industries such as finance, healthcare, and government. And from a management perspective, you have a single dashboard to manage and monitor all of your resources. So that's from an operational perspective, that's from monitoring, debugging, a single pane of glass. You can go in and do everything inside of Azure, which is really, really nice. Okay, so our app migration journey. So app migration and modernization journey today. So we have typical lift and shift. So take your application as is. It's typically going to be a monolith. We can rehost that inside of Azure, inside of IaaS. So it's basically inside of VMs that you're controlling. The other option is we can optimize for the cloud. So it's still a monolith, but now we're going to move it over into PaaS. So replatforming, refactoring, so a little bit of code change, configuration change to get it into the PaaS space. From that, you get a lot of benefits that come to you, not having to manage it on VMs. If you want to scale this thing out to 4 or 5, you don't need to worry about going and building all those VMs and load balancing. You can just say, I need four instances of my application. And the third is cloud native. So this is like when you're really building brand new applications, you can just go straight to cloud native. Again, you're on the PaaS side, you're on serverless. In order to get there, if you have it coming from a legacy application, you're most likely going to rewrite and re-architect your application. Okay, so from a cost and timeline and simplification perspective, obviously in the bottom left, you have lower engineering complexity and cost. So as you go up vertically, that engineering complexity is going to go down. So is that cost. And as we move to the right, you're going to get faster time to market, and total cost of ownership is going to go down. And managing and maintaining this solution is going to go down also. So looking at this diagram, it's not to say you can't go straight from a rehost into a re-architect and rewrite, but it's just a lot more work. So today I'm going to be focusing just on the middle, which is cloud optimized. So how do we get it into PaaS? I have my current app. I just want to re-platform it into Azure. Okay, so typically what our migration process looked like in the past, even now, depending if you're new to Azure and you're not looking at all the tools and what the options are available, it can be a quite daunting task. So, you have your business decisions to make of if we want to go to the cloud. We've decided on Azure as our overall evaluation. Okay, then now we need to do, what's the engineering work in order to get there? And generally, most of your engineering staff is just going to start making this face because it's just daunting. You're not used to, maybe you don't know anything about Azure or moving to the cloud. So it just seems like a daunting. It's net new territory. You're a .NET developer. You don't know anything about Azure, so it can be scary. So Microsoft has made things easy. There are two options that are available. So with the right tools and accelerators, and organizational alignment, you can get there. You can get into the cloud pretty easily. Okay, so let's focus on my talk will be just on side of discovering and assessment and migrating your application. So I'm not going to be talking about landing zones or landing zone accelerators or application patterns, but I will provide some documentation near the end that anyone can go and look at later. We'll make the slides and stuff available offline if needed, and feel free to reach out to me if you have questions along those lines. Okay, so the experience before, I say before just because there's two different areas I'm going to be talking about, but Azure Migrate is still a current experience in Azure. It's very valuable to do, but the typical experience before from an Azure Migrate would be to go and find out all the VMs that you have on your network using a network appliance that you can download from Azure. And it would go and discover all your VMs, whether they're Linux, Windows, you're running SQL Server on it, what versions, how many databases, what kind of web apps do you have. And it would go and compile a list and produce this report and put it up inside of Azure Migrate, which is what the resource is called inside of Azure. And in there, so what it's really doing is doing a discovery of your applications, mainly through VMs. It's going to do an assessment. So from a .NET and Tomcat perspective, it's going to be looking at your config files, and it's going to do an assessment of migrating those applications, whether or not they can be done. And finally, we'll actually do your migration if you want it to. So you can actually go ahead and have it automatically migrate. It will go and create all the resources in Azure for you, and it'll actually put your code, move the binaries, and set up everything in Azure. So your application will get migrated. There are different pros and cons to doing that. I think if you're getting started into Azure, it's definitely a quick win. Kind of like right click and deploy from Visual Studio. It's nice to do, nice to learn from, but it's probably not optimally what you want to do in production. You're going to want to set up your environment properly. So that's that whole landing zone. You're going to want to have that implemented first. You're going to want to, if you can, go down the infrastructure as code route. So with either Terraform or Azure Bicep, and you're going to want to do deployments that way. That way you have source control of your infrastructure. But again, you don't have to. Those are things, a lot more things that you need to learn in order to do. So you can get started and just do these 3 simple steps: do a discovery, do an assessment, and do the migration. and get stuff into the cloud. I definitely recommend looking at the landing zone accelerators, looking at the app patterns. So use this as more of a discovery and a learning perspective as a POC, and then make your best judgment for your organization for what makes sense. And this tool is really good. I'm not saying don't use this tool, but I'm saying this is really good when you have large scale discovery of .NET and Java applications that need to be inside of your large enterprise. So it will go and produce a report of that discovery. Again, you don't need to do the migration. So it's a great starting point. You don't have to do sort of one-off on every single application, which is where I'm going to be going in my next slide as an alternative approach. So demo one, I can demo this quickly. Let me leave here. So you would go into Azure. I'm not going to do that part, but I will show you the tooling that you will be getting just because for time. So you go into Azure. I'll get this set up on another browser. I'll bring it over in a second. And what you do is you just create an Azure Migrate resource, and that's it. So from there, all your results will show up. You can go and download this tool. This is called the Azure App Service Migration Assistant. They also have one for databases. So it will go and scan whatever database server, all your databases on it, and it will also produce a report from a database perspective. But today I'm just looking at the App Service Migration Assistant. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my site. So this is already connected to my local IIS website. I have an old ASP.NET Web Forms application. So I'll just show that here. So you get an idea. So eShop Legacy Web Forms. You can get over on GitHub if you want to follow along. Again, so this is .NET 4.6 or so, 4.5. It's a web form application. So it's quite legacy. It's using a database, SQL Server. That's about it. Nothing complicated about this application. So what I'm going to do is using this tool, it's going to go and analyze my IIS resource. It's going to look at the websites in it, and it's going to produce an assessment. So you can see here, it's gone and there's been 12 successful scans or checks. We have 2 warnings and 0 errors. So from a warning perspective, it's configuration issue, talking about basically where this section name, and it's going to give you some more information. So I can click on this if I want to go learn more about this application or about this error that it's providing. And the other one is the localhost DB server. So it found that there's a connection string of localhost. Doesn't like this. Again, it's not failing. You can still do a migration if I want to keep doing next. So next would be, it's going to log into Azure. I'm going to go pick my Azure Migrate resource. So that's where this information that gets captured is going to get uploaded. So this is me downloading this tool and looking at a specific server. If I did the other option is you can deploy an Azure Migrate appliance on your network, and that will go and do the discovery of everything that it can find, and then upload those results into your Azure Migrate resource. So those are the sort of the 2 ways that Azure Migrate will go and do this. I then go to next options, and if I kept doing next, then it will do the migration. So I'm not actually going to do that. The left is not actually a navigation area. You really need to use next to do navigation. If I do click on anything, it just goes back to the beginning. Kind of an annoying thing about the tool. But as you can see here, no showstoppers. It just looked at my IIS, and that's the keyword here. Looked at IIS, looked at my configuration file from my website, and that's it. Okay, so this app can get migrated in with no issues. I'm going to close that down, bring back up my PowerPoint, and slideshow from slide. Okay, the next tool that I'm going to get into is the application and code assessment. So this is a new tool that came out with Ignite in November 2023. So this is an offline code and application assessment. This utility is used to assess .NET application source code and identifies replatforming and migration opportunities into Azure. Okay, it's looking at the application technology that's been used through static code analysis. It will look at ways to support your estimate for what needs to change, and it will accelerate the code replatforming by giving you recommendations on how to overcome any potential issues. This application code assessment is available in Visual Studio, but you can also download it as a CLI extension. And as you see in a later slide, it supports both .NET and Java. Okay, so examples of dependency that it's going to be looking for, so a lot more than what the Azure Migrate did. Again, this is an offline code analysis tool, so this is going to be looking more at your application and what it's doing, not at what IIS and your config file says. So it's going to be looking at your databases. Which databases are you talking to? How's the configuration? What kind of code are you using to talk to those databases? Same for file system, any network access. What kind of authentication are you using? Are you using Windows authentication, Windows identity? There's a lot more involved in what this tool will do to identify risks of going to Azure. Okay, and before I do the demo here, just a quick screen grab of an existing application. Whatever you show shows up in a nice little report. This report's in Visual Studio. Again, if you're doing it from a command line, the export can be into various flavors. So I'll show you how that works. And again, this is for .NET. So if you go to aka.ms/appcat/.NET, you'll see all the resources for .NET. And if you want to look at the Java version, then just go to aks.ms/appcat/Java for a similar separate tool, which is CLI only for Java. And from a report it produces, so what you're looking at the right is HTML, but you can also get JSON and CSV if you just want the raw data. Okay, so demo number 2. Go back to Visual Studio. Okay, so I have my application running right here. I'll just build it. This did it build before, right? So just make sure it's going to build. Build succeeded. Again, so now I'm going to right click and I'm going to say replatform to Azure. So I've already downloaded the tool. So you go through Visual Studio Marketplace. I've downloaded the application. Second demo, part of this demo, I'll do the CLI version of it. But if I say replatform into Azure, it brings up this screen here. So I'm going to go ahead and say, give me a new report. So all my previous reports were listed there if I want to jump to another report. I'm going to go here. I only have one solution with one project. If I had multiple projects in here, I could pick and choose which projects I wanted. I could say just do the whole solution. So I'm going to go next. Okay, and then have the options of what kind of components do I want to analyze. So by default, it's going to look at source code and settings. Optionally, you can also look at binary dependencies. So it's going to look at all your external dependencies, binaries, NuGet packages, and look for issues in that as well. For now, I'll just do source code and settings. Okay, and I'm going to do analysis. So here's the report. So I got the one project. So I had 6 issues, and those 6 issues. So those are like the 6 categories of issues. And then so in each category, you can see the number of instances and the total story points. So story points is something that they've made up. It's not something you can go and configure, but it's just a rough estimate of how complicated some of these issues might be. So if I go into security, go project, let me go to aggregate issues. So connection string is detected. So this is potential severity. We have mandatory. So again, this one's showing a mandatory thing that you need to change. I go and expand it. So provides built-in support authentication. Shows that my application is using Windows authentication, which is not supported on Azure. So same application, IIS is configured for this folder. That was not found with Azure Migrate, whereas this did. So again, this will go into a lot more depth of your application to pull out issues. It does give you, right down to the source control. You can go find more information if you want. I can then come in, this report is not static. I can go and save it, and I can keep iterating on it. So I can say, this is not applicable, and then I'll go and save it. So that issue will go away. Again, it will ask to resave it, replace it. So this is something that this report and the data goes with it is something that you can save into source control. It can be a living document with your application until you get it into Azure. So as things evolve, you can come in here and mark it off that it's either resolved or not applicable. You can see the other potentials, local or network operation IDs detected. It goes down and finds exactly which line of code. Right, so if I click on it, it will take me there. So very interactive, which is really nice. So that's the coming from Visual Studio perspective. Let me get the console up. I'll show you that. Okay, and then you want to run appcat, analyze, and give it the solution name. Okay, so again, I'm gonna get the same sort of choices. Press enter to accept. So I'm gonna save it as a CSV file. Report name, S3, report, and I'm gonna go ahead and proceed. Okay, so there's the result. Come back with the same results we saw before. So 1 mandatory, 3 optional, 13 potential changes that should affect, and then it automatically loaded my CSV file with the issues. So those are the 2 different ways you can run this static code analysis. Again, it works for .NET and works for Java from a .NET side. It's C# and VB. And it's not just current applications, it supports legacy, .NET framework kind of applications. Okay, so come back to my slides. Okay, so what did we cover? So we covered the benefits of migrating to Azure, looked at the migration and modernization journey, and then we talked about different ways of the process of migrating your applications into Azure. So by going through that report, you can go ahead and fix your application, change any configs that are needed, and then it's much easier now to go into Azure. So I can now go back and use the Azure Migrate tooling, the one inside of Azure at the first demo, and I can migrate into Azure now with much more confidence of my application. So both tools I recommend using. Or you can right-click on Azure, right-click in Visual Studio on your project, and say deploy and configure up connectivity into Azure into an existing app service, or it can go create an app service for you, but that's another option for you. So there's many different ways to get into Azure. I'm not going to talk about that outside of this talk. But yeah, so I hope that really helps you update your applications, get them into Azure. Doesn't support AWS or GCP at this time. The tool is open source, so you could always go and update, go put some feedback and give it to them. Okay, and get started today. So you're not on .NET 8, you should migrate to .NET 8. .NET came out last November. If you're on .NET 7, end of life for that is coming up in May, and end of life for .NET 6 is coming up in November of 2024. So if you haven't tried .NET 8, definitely download it, give it a try, and follow the migration guides. Reach out to Anthony or myself, always available to help out. The link for the application and code assessment tool, aka.ms/appcat.net. Last one, further reading. There's a good checklist provided by Microsoft on migrating web apps to app service. I'll put the link in the show notes for you to click to go through to that, and along with a bunch of other additional resources. So that's everything I had to talk about. Again, if you need to connect with me, those are my connect details. Best way is probably just DM me on Twitter. If you didn't get Anthony's connect details, I can put it in the chat. Otherwise, just reach out to me and I can share Anthony's information. Okay, Anthony, how did it go? Any questions? No questions so far. It's been a quiet night, except for our technical difficulties we had in the beginning. Okay. Anthony, you're muted if you're talking.
Oh, sorry.
I saw you're sharing your screen. So yeah, if you need to connect with Anthony, here's his connection details.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. We'll catch you up on the flip side. We're going to try and get another presentation going next month. Again, if anyone wants to speak at the user group virtually about anything .NET related, feel free to reach out to me, and happy to have you on. And yeah, it's always a great time. There's always something new in .NET to learn and talk about. So I think that's it. No comments, no questions. So thank you, Anthony, once again. Take it easy. We'll talk soon, everyone. Thank you. Bye.